Hi, my name is Kim Mutcherson, co-dean of Rutgers Law School in Camden, and this is The Power of Attorney.
I am very excited today to have one of our Rutgers Camden alums with us, and I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself.
My name is Rebecca Bresnik, and I am an attorney for NASA at the Johnson Space Center.
Terrific. Thank you so much for being with us today, Rebecca. I'm really excited about our conversation. You definitely have one of the most interesting careers that we're going to get to talk about today, so it's wonderful to have you here. We're obviously going to get to NASA, but I want to kind of start at the beginning, if I could. You're a native of New Jersey, and I would love to talk a little bit about how you decided, one, that you wanted to be a lawyer, but then two, decided that you wanted to come to Rutgers Law School. So let's start with the lawyer, and then we'll talk about Rutgers.
I am from Pompton Plains, New Jersey, a great little town up in northern New Jersey. And I had a great interest in anything that was international. And I had really hoped to get into the international field, hopefully making a difference by serving my country and working in the government sector. And so during college, I did an exchange program to Japan. And then during that time frame, I traveled significantly through Southeast Asia. And in particular, I spent some time in the DMZ in Korea, the demilitarization zone. During that time, seeing a nation that was separated and at war even after 50 years, it really prompted me even more to want to do something in the international field. And at that time then, considering the international law field. So after college, I followed my passion and I did a master's degree in Asian Studies at the University of Texas in Austin, and I studied Asian Studies and Japanese, and I was still undecided whether I wanted to do a law degree or a PhD, but I chose a law degree. As I said, I was originally from New Jersey and knew of the outstanding reputation of Rutgers Law School, and I'm not going to lie, I appreciated the in-state tuition, and so decided to go to Rutgers Law School.
Terrific. I want to talk about the law school and your experience in law school, but I also just want to get a sense of why you decided to focus your travels and your studies on Asia. I mean, obviously, once you decide you want to do something that's international, there are lots of places to choose from. So I'm curious why that's where you landed.
Well, at that point in time in my life, I had taken a martial art, and it was a Korean martial art, Taekwondo, and I was actually pretty competitive in it. And so that basically how my interest in Asia began. And from middle school into college, I had taken French. So I really wanted to do something different where I was pushing myself and going in a completely different direction. So at that point in time, I was attending the University of Delaware, and they had just started a new Japanese language program. So I signed up for the Japanese language program and really enjoyed the language and decided I would go to Japan for a year.
Terrific. So eventually you decided that you were going to go to the law school. You came back to New Jersey and ended up as a student at Rutgers Law. Let's talk a little bit about what it was like to be in law school here. I think a lot of people hear stories about what law school is going to be like, and they are often scary stories or intimidating stories. So I'd love to hear kind of what your expectation was of law school, and then whether or to what degree Rutgers Law lived up or hopefully not down to those expectations.
So I was not from a family that had lawyers in it, so I really did not have expectations. I just wanted to go to law school, and I'll admit I was a little anxious, especially when reading books and hearing about the Socratic method of teaching at law school. But honestly, I adjusted to what was expected of me, and I really enjoyed the intellectual growth and the challenge of those 3 years. And in the end, I really thought I received a phenomenal education from Rutgers Law School, and it did a very, very good job of equipping me with the legal skills that I needed to meet the challenges of working in places like the Pentagon and the field of space law as an international attorney for NASA.
Are there any particular classes or professors that were especially impactful for you while you were here at Rutgers?
I had a lot of stellar professors during my time at Rutgers Law School. There were a few, however, that I thought really helped shape my law school experience and my career choices, one being Professor Roger Clark, and then another being Jonathan Malamud and another Jay Feynman. So Roger Clark, he taught numerous international law classes, and that really exposed me to the various areas of practicing international public law, which is the area of law that I'm practicing. So he was very influential. And then Jonathan Malamud, he taught me constitutional law, and Jay Feynman taught me torts. And both of them, though not in the practice area that I'm actually practicing law, they're both very influential in challenging me and teaching me how to think like an attorney. And I think what I appreciated most about all three of those professors is that they really took time outside of the classroom and shared their thoughts about different career options that I was considering. Also, even after I graduated, I stayed in contact with them over the past 20 years. They've been really lifelong mentors and friends.
Terrific. So you talked a little bit about the idea of thinking like an attorney or thinking like a lawyer, and that's something that I talk about. I also teach torts, so that's something I talk about with my first-year law students pretty early on. I wonder, what does that mean to you, right? What does it mean to be a person who thinks like an attorney or who thinks like a lawyer?
I think most importantly, it's seeing an issue from all sides and not just understanding it from your viewpoint or the other side's viewpoint. I mean, I have seen numerous times where I've been given a problem to work out, and it's finding all the different ways that I can find a solution to that problem.
So let's skip forward a little bit. So you do your 3 years of law school, you have some great professors, you get to take some terrific classes, and then comes the hard part, which is now I have a law degree. What am I going to do with that law degree? And you've been able to do some really fascinating things with the law degree. So I would love to talk first about your time at the Pentagon. First, can you just tell me how is it that you landed the job there?
Between my second and third year of law school, I did a clerkship, and that clerkship was actually at the Pentagon. They had actually gotten back in touch with me and asked if I might be interested in a full-time job. And during that time frame, too, I had been researching some other jobs with the government in the area of international law. And I went down for an interview with the Air Force General Counsel's office where I had previously interned, and they eventually invited me back to work in their general law area. And although it wasn't in the area of law that I wanted to practice, they did have an international law branch, and so eventually I was hoping to move into that international law branch. And basically working at the Pentagon was a dream job for me. It was an interesting place to work. It was a place where I could make an impact, and the people that I had worked with were absolutely amazing. Soon after getting there in 2000, after 9/11 happened, the workload there was especially busy, and that's when they started to allow me to work some international issues. As part of my work, I was doing all different types of international cooperation with allied nations, and we were dealing with some pretty high-end technologies and cooperation, particularly in the areas of unmanned air vehicles, and basically cooperating in areas of technology that were later used when the U.S. engaged in the war with Iraq.
Got it. One of the things that I often talk about with alums and with practicing lawyers is how often people come to law school with this vision of the kind of work that they're going to do. You know, they say, oh, I'm going to be a health lawyer, I'm going to do international law. And as first-year law students, they almost always have no idea what that actually means in practice. And I think when people think about international law, they often think just about human rights law. But the kind of work that you were doing, which is very much international law, is a really different type of international law, I think. So, if a student came to you and said, what does it mean to do international public law? What kinds of things would you tell them? What does that job look like? Or what does that field look like?
Well, I think, as I mentioned in taking Professor Clark's classes, international public law is in and of itself extremely varied, and there's so many different areas in international public law that you can practice. So I think you would need to first figure out what area of international public law you have an interest. You can do human rights law for agencies. There's, as I said, I was doing international public law for the Department of Defense. But like I said, it's so varied. The first and foremost thing I would say is if you want to do public international law, a lot of it is primarily in the federal government, and they are very difficult jobs to get. And as I mentioned, I took the job with the Air Force General Counsel's office in their general law division. And It was a wonderful opportunity to get my foot in the door, to understand the government, to understand how it works, its structure. And general law is a basic area of law that everyone should know. And then from there, I was able to move around. And so I think I would also give the advice, even if you want to practice in a certain particular area for a particular agency, don't give up the opportunity to work for that agency, even though it's not in the particular area that you want to start out in.
Yeah, I think that's such a great piece of advice. Where you are 2 years out of law school can be really different from where you are 5 years, can be really different from where you are 10 years out. So, getting that first job and that first foot in the door, especially in a field, as you say, where it's sort of difficult to build a career there, don't think that because you start one place, that's where you're going to end.
You also never know, what's going to push you into a certain direction.
Absolutely. One of the other things that you got to do while you were at the Pentagon was being involved with this working group on sexual assault allegations and, how the U.S. Air Force Academy was responding to those. Can you talk about that work a little bit, sort of how you ended up in that working group and what kind of work you got to do and hopefully what kind of positive outcome that work had?
So when those allegations came out publicly, the majority of the attorneys at the Air Force General Counsel's office, female attorneys, were a bit older, and the General Counsel, Miss Mary Walker, she had made the determination to put me on the working group because I was younger, and she thought the cadet out at the Air Force Academy might be able to relate to me a bit easier than if it were someone older. I spent a significant time out at the Air Force Academy doing interviews, and the team was tasked with looking into the allegations and writing a report. The one thing I learned, there were many things I learned about doing that and being a part of that working team. First, I was a young, brand new attorney, and I was a bit scared, wondering if I could live up to the expectations of working on this team of very seasoned attorneys. And we worked some extremely long hours. We were working about 6.5 days a week, about 12 hours a day. And ultimately, each and every individual allegation was looked into, and what I really learned was, again, what we talked about earlier, is looking at it from the viewpoint of everyone involved. Some of the allegations were valid allegations. Some of them were not valid allegations when you applied the law to the allegation and the facts that actually occurred. But out of it all, the Air Force was able to come up with more avenues for these women to come forward with their allegations, and not just having one avenue to bring up these allegations, but an avenue that made them more comfortable, and then also avenues that allowed these women to feel as if they were being heard. I don't think that there was this uptick of sexual harassment necessarily at the Air Force Academy. I think it was the process of these women not feeling as if they were heard that really caused this to go public.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things, and we were obviously living through a really interesting time, in terms of the Me Too movement and Time's Up, and a lot of the conversations that we're having are about people having access to process, right? Being able to feel like when there are allegations that there is someone who they can go to and say, here's this thing that happened, let's do something about it, let's have a conversation about it, as opposed to people sort of burying these things and not being able to have any kind of recourse.
I absolutely agree. I mean, some of it's just being able to have that process and being heard and then being able to work through that process. But if there's not a good process for them to work through these allegations and these issues and concerns, then their only choice is what happened at the Air Force Academy, where it went public. Unfortunately, it went public in a very negative way, and it was really, and we worked with a really great team. They did a great investigation, and then also, like I said, at the end, they set in place some really good processes for these women to have in the instances that they feel that they've been harassed or there's been any type of sexual discrimination.
And is your feeling, having done that work, which is such critical work, do you feel like the legacy of that work is still being felt within the Academy?
So I left the Air Force General Counsel's office in 2003, 2004. So I would hope so. I would hope that those processes are still in place. I think that the military has had its issues with sexual harassment, and a lot of it has to do with these are jobs where people are living next to each other, living in close quarters. And so I don't think it's a downfall of the Department of Defense or the Air Force. I think a lot of it also has to do with the type of job that they perform and how it has males and females so closely located and socializing and living with one another. It's difficult. Stuff like that will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's the importance of having the process, and not just the process, but also the education for people to understand what is right and what is wrong.
Right.
So I think education so this stuff does not happen is also important. And to also show that there are repercussions if you do not take it seriously.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let me take us down another piece of your career path, which is landing eventually at NASA, which is completely fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work that you've been doing there. So why don't we start sort of big and then kind of narrow a little bit. So what's the position that you have at NASA now?
So currently, I am the lead for international law matters at the Johnson Space Center.
Perfect. And if, the way that we have been describing your practice area is that you do space law. And I feel like if you walked up to somebody and said, I do space law, their next question would be, what does space law mean? So what is encompassed in the idea of space law?
So space law is a fairly new and emerging area of law in comparison to other areas of the law. And it really doesn't encompass just one area. It's actually a very unique area of the law in that it's a very interdisciplinary practice area. So it can cover both domestic and international law areas. And it draws from different specialties. It draws from areas of contract law, export control, administrative law, commercial law, international law, and then all of the different treaties that cover space activities. The thing I love most about it is that it is a very new and developing field of the law. And in some instances, some of the decisions that I get to make here at NASA are allowing us to really shape the future of space law.
I love that. So the question that immediately popped into my head is that, space has been around for a long time, and we've been in space for a fairly long time. So why is it that space law is now this sort of emerging area of law as opposed to years ago when we first started having space exploration? What's changed?
So I think a couple of things have really changed. The difficulty with the mission of NASA is every time a new administration comes in politically, they will change what our mission is, and it's their prerogative to do that. And so there have been many times where NASA's been going down one path, and then a new administration comes in, and it goes down another path, and then it goes down another path with a new administration. And then along with that change in the path, we either have funding or we don't have funding. In the past couple of years, we've gotten a significant amount of support from the current administration to explore. And they have come out, they've developed the National Space Council, and they said, we are returning to the moon by 2024. I think also the emerging technologies that weren't available in the past decades that we do have now, so you have companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, Northrop Grumman, which has a commercial cargo capability. There are a lot more companies now getting involved and putting money into the exploration of space. And then along with that is the development of space law and policy that will allow for those companies to be able to benefit commercially and financially by exploring space. So I think those three things are probably three things that have really allowed for space to really boom in the past couple of years.
Got it. And I wonder a little bit if space law in some ways is kind of like maritime law, right? Or the law of the seas, right? That there's this sort of physical part of the world that just gets treated really differently than if something happens on land. Is space sort of like the maritime law of our current times?
So yes, you're absolutely correct. A lot of this space law is actually drawn from some of the premises are based very similar to maritime law, also to the Antarctic Treaty. So areas in our world that are a bit more analogous to space. You're absolutely correct.
Okay, great. One of the things that you said is that working in space law is very interdisciplinary. There's international law, there are contracts, all these other sorts of things there's public-private kinds of conflicts that I imagine are happening. Is there any way for somebody to prepare for a career in space law? To give yourself the foundation that you need? Or is it one of those things where you get into it and then that's where you build your expertise?
I think you could take classes during law school that will definitely help you prepare for being in this area of the law. Space law, with regards to the treaties, the basis for space law in those treaties is international law. So I would suggest any type of international law class would be helpful. And just as you mentioned, maritime law has some applicability. So even understanding the premises of maritime law will help you better understand space law. And then with regard to some of the different areas I mentioned, we have a wonderful administrative law class at Rutgers Law School. I think that would be very helpful because a lot of space law practicing in the government area, administrative law helps. Commercial law and contract law, I think all of those courses would be extremely helpful in this area. But I do agree also it's an area, too, that once you get into it, you then start developing the knowledge that's very unique to that particular area of space law that you want to practice.
Got it. What would you say is the most unexpected or surprising aspect of either working at NASA or working in the space industry or space law in general?
I think probably for me, it's how much space law and space has evolved in the past decade. Especially in the next 5 years, we will not have just one, but we'll have 3 space vehicles that are U.S. built. And 2 of these vehicles will be transporting astronauts to the International Space Station. And then the 3rd vehicle is the Orion vehicle, and that will be taking our astronauts to cislunar space, back to the moon, and then the plan is to go to Mars. So for me, to be a part of this it's really a privilege.
Absolutely. So I'm guessing that a lot of people out there in the world are like me, and sort of most of what we know about NASA or space exploration or any of these issues comes from movies. I wonder, it's one of those things when you're, a lawyer or even when you're a law student and you watch law shows, you spend the whole time critiquing all the things that they get wrong. Are there lots of things that you see people getting wrong in thinking about space and what our relationship is to space in the sort of public ways that we consume information about NASA and the work that you folks are doing there?
I think NASA has been doing a really good job of getting out to the public what their mission is. The amazing benefits of exploring space and the scientific benefits of the research that we do on ISS, I don't think is as known and understood. And so the science on ISS, some of these breakthroughs will hopefully give us cures to cancer, will help with many medical ailments, and it's those stories that I think the public needs to better understand.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I do think you're right. When you hear these huge numbers of what it costs to do things in space, which I think probably makes perfect sense that it's extremely expensive, translating that in a way that makes those costs worthwhile is probably a really difficult task.
There's a lot of questions of why we have the International Space Station in low Earth orbit. And some of the greatest benefits to the International Space Station is the science that we do up there. The science it's very unique because it's being done in an environment that you don't have to be concerned about gravity. And there's certain experiments that when you do it in an environment where you don't have gravity, you actually get better results. And so many of these are crystal growth, where when you look at the growth of the crystal, you can then apply that to medicines that can be developed for cures for cancer. Also, the importance, too, is how the body reacts in an environment of no gravity. And that's important because as we explore further beyond low Earth orbit, we need to understand how that environment will impact our astronauts. And the exploration of beyond low Earth orbit is extremely important, too, because many of these planets, asteroids, they have energy resources. And these energy resources, if we could find a way to bring them back to this Earth, we'd be an Earth that wouldn't be as dependent upon gasoline, oil, And there's some energy resources out there that if we could bring back just a truck full of it, it could supply energy for a city like New York City for months. And that's helium-3. So it's understanding what's out there and its applicability to us, and hopefully then bringing it back and making the world a better place to live.
That sounds extremely exciting. So hopefully we will have some success there. One of the things that I was thinking as you were talking is that, depending upon what area of law a person ends up practicing in, it can be the case that not only do you become an expert in particular fields of law or particular areas of law, but you have to become kind of expert in the underlying field in order to be able to do what you do as a lawyer. And so I'm listening to you talking about what kind of vehicles are in space and what's the research that's going on the International Space Station and what are some of the sources of energy that we can get from space. And so it sounds to me like not only are you obviously an expert in space law, but that you kind of have to be a little bit of an expert in space in order to do the work that you're doing. Is that accurate?
I think to be the best lawyer that you can be for your clients is to understand their business. So as the attorney for the International Space Station and now the attorney for Gateway, I would say I spend a significant amount of time understanding their mission, understanding what their goals are. And that's important because when you're giving legal advice, if you really don't understand the mission and their goals, I don't think you can give them the best advice as if you did understand those goals and their mission. Their mission is so interrelated to the legal advice you give. So if I didn't understand how vehicles go up into space and what involves the launch, what involves the reentry, I wouldn't have the knowledge to probably really understand the best liability scheme for the agency or the best insurance and how insurance should be dealt with. So again, understanding the mission, what happens up on the ISS, I think is very important. I have seen this as especially applicable as we are trying to commercialize low Earth orbit, and we're allowing now for commercial activities to happen on ISS. Well, to understand and allow these commercial activities to happen up on ISS, you really have to understand what goes on ISS. So without understanding those activities, it's really hard to help form the new law for these types of activities.
Right. So you're sort of working on two levels at the same time, which sounds like it's good for your brain and kind of keeps you on your toes.
Yes, and I will admit my husband's also involved in the industry too, so the two of us also being able to share our knowledge and our different perspectives has also been extremely helpful for me as an attorney.
I want to talk about another aspect of your career, which was that in 2012 you received a NASA fellowship and were able to attend the Space Odyssey Institute. Can you just tell me what that's about and what that experience was like?
So the Space Odyssey Institute is put on by the International Space University, and they have a program where they have different classes that are given every month, and as a result of getting this fellowship, I was able to attend one of their segments. It was a wonderful way for me to broaden my understanding of space law, an area that I didn't have as much knowledge, and meet more people. It was a group of people from all over the world, so again, you're not just learning the subject area, but you're also learning from other people within the class about the different areas of space law that they work within.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So I want to switch gears again and talk about something that we've been focused on a lot in the law school and in the legal profession, which is about particularly thinking about women in the law and how men continue to dominate lots of positions of power in the legal field, and that women often don't have the same opportunities or experiences of advancement that men do. Given your background at the Pentagon and then at NASA, my guess would be, and certainly please tell me if I'm wrong, but my guess would be that those were very male-dominated environments. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you. I would say particularly when you were a younger lawyer coming into that, somebody who was sort of still getting your feet wet, maybe a little bit about how you see things have changed over the years that you've been doing this kind of work, and finally kind of what your hopes are for the future.
So as a young attorney working at the Pentagon, I would say for the most part, I was just seen as a lawyer. Now, I did have one instance where I walked into a meeting and it was with a two-star general and he was waiting to start the meeting. And so I asked him, what are you waiting on? And he says, well, I'm waiting for the attorney to show up from your office. And then I had to politely tell him that I was his attorney. So there's been instances like that, but I think for the government, it is a bit different. We all come in on the same pay scale, whether we're male or female. And when it comes to working for the government, particularly at DOD, at a time during 9/11 and right after 9/11, we were just all concerned about getting a mission done. And I would say that being a female was not really seen as a factor. And I would say it's even less of a factor here at NASA. And again, we have a mission, and our mission is to get humans in space by 2024 back to the moon. And as long as I'm doing my job and doing it well, that's all that matters. The pay scale, as I said, for the government structure, I think really helps to provide and ensure equality of pay and benefit. And I think working for the federal government also allows for a more flexible schedule for females who decide to have families, but it also doesn't restrict them from moving ahead if they do decide to have children and take time off or take maternity leave.
That's great.
Just to answer, too, when you asked what is my hope for the future, I know that the field of law isn't always as what I just mentioned as it is for the federal government. So my hope, too, is that the equality that I do feel working for the federal government can be felt throughout the career field for women in the field of law.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us are hoping for that and working on that. So we just started our semester last week, and one of the things that I get to do is give a speech at orientation to welcome our new class and welcome our new students. I'm curious what's the message that you would want to send, to the very nervous group of 1Ls who are getting ready to walk into a law school classroom for the first time? What are some of the critical pieces of advice or critical things that you think they should, be thinking about as they first start their law school career and then ultimately a career in the law?
I think some of the premises are going to be very, very basic, whether they're applicable to law school or just life in general. And I think one of the first things is just hard work pays off. When you make a decision that Saturday, if you want to go off and have fun versus study, that you have to really decide whether or not you want to be at law school, because law school does require about 90% of you, and it requires a significant amount of hard work. But then also with that said, I would say that you also have to keep a balance, and particularly during law school because it is so all-encompassing. I would say that you need to make sure that you take care of yourself and you try to continue to keep some balance in your life. And that is hard during law school. I think having support from family and friends is very important, and also just making sure that you don't just spend your whole time studying, but again, like I said, that you have some sort of balance. And then also I think very importantly too, as you start going through law school and you're given this incredible opportunity to get a law degree, that once you get out of law school and you get yourself established, I think very importantly, you really should see and find ways to serve others and to give back to the community, and to find people that you can then mentor and help them through the process and help them in their careers.
That is a lovely piece of advice. Definitely. Law school obviously is about teaching you how to be a lawyer and hopefully to do that really well. But I feel like law school often can teach you lessons about your life and how you want to live your life. And I wonder if there are any of those kinds of life lessons that you drew from law school.
I think some of the life lessons were the same as the advice I would give a new attorney. And again, a lot of that is if you really work hard, it will pay off. I think law school also taught me both in my professional and personal life. There's always two sides to a story, if not more. Being an attorney, it can be a very all-encompassing, both as a law student and as a practicing attorney. And it really is important to keep a balance in your life. And just that law school and practicing law shouldn't control your life. It should be a part of your life. And then again, also just the importance that I think it's really important in life to serve others and to give back to your community.
Perfect. So one of the things that you were telling us, Rebecca, is that you actually are teaching a class in space law now. So tell me about that. What goes into a space law class? What are those students getting from that experience?
So the University of Houston Law Center had asked if I was interested in coming and teaching a space law class. It's about a 30-40 minute drive from my home, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important things I think as an attorney I have a responsibility to do is to give back. And I really saw this as a way to give back and to share my experiences and knowledge with these law students. My first semester was last spring semester, and the students were just a phenomenal group. We went through all of the basic treaties of international law and talked about some of the new developments both domestically and internationally, and basically gave them an understanding of space law and space policy as it stands right now. I will be teaching another class for the university. I did a good enough job for them to ask me to come back, so I look forward to doing that again also.
Excellent. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It was really, really wonderful to get to know you a little bit better and to get to know the work that you're doing at NASA. So I look forward to hearing more about how everything is going there and seeing us on the moon in 2024.
And so do I.
Yeah.
The Power of Attorney is produced by Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations, minutes from Philadelphia and New York City, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal, small campus experience. Learn more by visiting law.rutgers.edu.